Philip was full of delight. I'm also full of delight. And it's just great to look out and see you all here again. This is our 5th year, and as we've done it, the source of the terror has changed. We were in a room in Dublin doing another Ireland's Edge a few years ago, and Nuala beside me voiced the thought that we were both having, which was, God, will there be anybody here but ourselves? And the beauty of that statement was that ourselves is a very wide group to begin with. And it's full of friends and family and supporters who've been here from the get-go. So thank you again to all of you, and it's great to see you again. And for those of you who are new, welcome to ourselves, and great for you to join the caravan. I'm joined here by 2 more friends of mine, by Martha Farrell, who's from below the hill, a very mystical triangle now from Castle Gregory, Camp and Dingle, and Deirdre de Bhailís from back west, back Ventry Way. They're going to talk to us about their own stories of sustainability here on our beloved peninsula. And to me, their stories are compelling, they're uplifting, and they're motivating. And before we move on to some of the broader themes that we're going to discuss later on, I was really keen that we anchor it here in the local, and what these 2 women are doing is quite remarkable. So in this Southwest, let's put a positive spin on radicalisation, and I'm going to open up with Martha and ask Martha to tell us the story of your own radicalisation.
I suppose it started in 2015. You could say it was an annus horribilis for the Bhailís community, and for me personally. I'd lost my father in September, and I suppose the Bhailís people are also going through probably the worst winter in living memory, where a succession of Atlantic storms blew sand up and over the sand dune and onto the only road in and out of the main residential area of Bhailís. And it was a frightening time for people. And I suppose I have a memory of my siblings and I driving down to Bhailís on that first Christmas day without my father, trying to visit his grave and having to turn the car around and drive home because of sand and floodwater on the road. So it was a difficult time, but I think it led to a motivation to do something. Yeah.
And tell us about those, what are the circumstances of the Bhailís for those who aren't familiar with it?
So Bhailís is a tombolo, which is a sandy spit that links 2 offshore islands, actually, in the case of Bhailís, to the Dingle Peninsula. It's stunningly beautiful. It has some absolutely spectacular beaches. It's very popular with the surfing community. All kinds of surfers come there. And, you know, during the busy summer season, we could have up to 27,000 cars on the peninsula in a single week. It's also a really important habitat. So we have some really rare and protected wildlife. Much of the sand dune system is protected under the EU Habitats Directive. It's designated as a special area of conservation. We also have a special protection area. So it's an area that's under a lot of pressure from a lot of different, I suppose, sectors, and it needs to be protected.
And Martha, after that horrible Christmas Day experience, what happened then in 2016?
Yeah, I suppose you could trace it back to February 2016, and Dr. Eugene Farrell from NUI Galway, he happened to be in the area to present some of the research he was doing on the dune response to storm activity on Brandon Bay. And I suppose at the time, the road had been blocked and cleared 17 times by Kerry County Council. So the community was encouraged to attend his presentation to see if he had any ideas. You know, he's a geomorphologist, so he would hopefully have some advice. And, you know, at the time there were 300 people living all year round in Bhailís. 200 people showed up to that presentation, and it turned into a public meeting. And, Eugene Farrell, he urged us to mobilise, to galvanise, to organise and start interacting with the stakeholders. So we did that. 15 of us formed a committee and we started working with our key partners now, really, Kerry County Council, Clean Coast and Tashka, the National Parks and Wildlife Service, IT Tralee, and Eugene and his team stayed with us as well in NUI Galway. So I suppose we did a few initial interventions. So we fenced off a large area of sensitive dune, because the marram grass that binds the sand to keep a sand dune stabilised is actually fragile, so it can't really withstand trampling.
Yeah.
So had to be protected. And then in conjunction with Susan...
And I suppose one slight complication on this is obviously a lot of the land is commonage.
Commonage, yeah.
So in terms of the safest thing we could do for the dunes is stay off them, but that's a complicated...
It was complicated because the commonage owners, they're private individuals, actually privately owned. But I suppose visitors to Maharees didn't understand that because it wasn't fenced off in a lot of areas, and they didn't have any facilities really. When they got to Maharees, there was no appointed place to park, and no one was telling them otherwise. These 7 farmers, how could they control thousands of people coming onto their land? So we had a role there, I think, in acting as in that role really to protect the sand dunes. And we also, we planted a lot of marram grass as well in conjunction with Susan Vickers from Clean Coast and Tashka. And I suppose as we were doing that, then IT Tralee wildlife biology staff were educating us on what we had there. So the inhabitants of the sand dunes were suddenly important to us. Wildlife and like the bee orchid, the natterjack toad. You don't find them elsewhere. So we saw a role for ourselves then in communicating that back to the general public. So we started engaging in biodiversity walks, creating educational material and signage. And I suppose now we're really just waiting for the results of the coastal erosion risk mitigation study, which was commissioned by Kerry County Council and the OPW, and that will set out a prognosis and perhaps...
And that will study the area all the way from Brandon
to
up to Ballyhaig.
To Ballyhaig, yeah. So that's really going to suggest, what protection, if any, can be offered to Maharees in the future, but it's certainly an area that's extremely vulnerable to climate change.
And what are the broader questions outside of the Maharees? So in some sense, the results of the study will give a sense of what's possible in terms of longer, of protection for the more medium term. But this, in many ways, the Maharees is the canary in the coal mine. What does the rest of the coal mine look for you?
I mean, in the early days, I was worrying about coastal erosion. That was the obvious thing, at the time. But I remember an engineer saying to me, Martha, coastal erosion is an issue, but actually, in the long run, the sea level rise from climate change will be a much bigger issue for Maharees. So I went online and I was looking up the mid-range flood extent prediction maps for 2100 for Ireland, and the mid-range predictions are showing a 0.5 metre sea level rise. The high end is actually showing up to 1 metre by 2100, and what that looks like for Maharees is inundation in a few parts, and I suppose that was to be expected. It's so low-lying. But what was surprising to me was actually, while this was happening to Maharees, it's also going to happen to a lot of other areas in Kerry, including parts of Dingletown, including parts of our capital town in Tralee. And I suppose for me, it's really sad that in the future, decisions will have to be taken about areas, which areas to save, which areas to let go, because the financial cost to our children is going to be colossal. So, Maharees, we're told, has been in existence for about 10,000 years. We know people have lived there since the Bronze Age, and suddenly, in the space of a few generations, we stand to lose parts of it. And I think that's just the saddest thing for me, and I suppose while it's going to happen to Maharees, it'll happen to coastal communities all over the world.
And how has it been, this effort of the last 3 years, in terms of engaging with the system and the parties, and as you try to mobilise and as ye try to?
Oh, it's been a learning curve, really. I mean, what we've learned is, I suppose, that, you know, at the beginning we were complete novices. Some might say we still are. But we learned that we have to reach out to people who did know. So there were a lot of experts out there, like Dr. Eugene Farrell, like Dr. Liam Carron in UI Galway, like Dr. Therese Higgins in IT Tralee, Killian Kelly. These people could tell us things that we didn't know, and were very willing to share their knowledge. That's the first thing, to reach out. And second thing we learned was, within each of the government agencies, there are a number of people that might be better to deal with for specific things. So learning the right people to go to for specific issues, building trust and relationships with them, really, because without our partners, we would have done nothing, really. I also think it was very important to share our wins. So we saw some really incredible dune regeneration from our own activities, and I think that brought in support from a lot of our critics at the early stages, when they were being denied access to beaches and parts of dunes they always went on, you know, or sort of drove to. I think as well, just the importance of having a group in a community is huge. Very often solutions are found within communities, and if you don't have a group that's set up formally, that's properly constituted, other stakeholders, I suppose, aren't as willing to deal with you. They'll take you more seriously if you're a group. So definitely it's been a learning curve.
And Deirdre, maybe bringing you in on this point, and Deirdre is the manager of the Dingle Creativity and Innovation Hub, which is just down the road here. And I should say, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a director of the company. So the two of us being on board here, just maybe taking up from Martha's comment there about the community. I suppose, Deirdre, when we set up as a group and started to, our mandate is to think about and to create the solutions for sustainable employment on the peninsula in the coming years, it was quite clear that we could do a hot desking, and we have done it, and it has the most beautiful view of any hot desk in Ireland. But it was also quite clear, Deirdre, it wasn't going to be enough, and that we needed a level of seeding and fostering. And so I'm going to ask you particularly, we have other themes as regards creative industries and digitalisation, but Deirdre, will you tell us the story of our work on the transition to a low carbon Dingle 2030?
Yes, so taking up on Martha's point, all right, there, having the structure, I suppose, of the Dingle Creativity and Innovation Hub was a key starting point for us to engage with people who have partnered with us and collaborated with us along the way to enable us to do the work that we're doing. One of the first partnerships, I suppose, was with SEAI, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, and we established a Dingle Sustainable Energy Community. That enabled us to do an energy master plan for the peninsula. So that has given us a wealth of information. We now understand how much energy we're using here. We know how much it costs. So we're using 315 gigawatt hours of energy per annum here in the peninsula, and it's costing us 37 million. So that's 37 million that's being exported from the peninsula. It's not contributing to creating employment or investing in businesses. Out of that master plan, we have developed a register of opportunities that can lead to saving 8 million of that. So that can potentially be invested back into the community once we figure out how to capture those savings. But what we've learned from that, and we've had huge support, I believe Eugene Farrell as well is a member of the MARI Centre, the Marine and Renewable Energy Centre in NUI Galway. But we've had a lot of collaboration with the MARI Centre in Cork, and a PhD researcher there, Conor McGuckin, has supported us on this journey. And he's fabulous, because every time I want to stat about something to do with energy on the peninsula, all I have to do is phone him, and he has it like that. But we know now that transport uses 54% of our energy. So we know that that's the big chunk of it here. And it may seem like an obvious one, but it's important to have the data that backs that up. We know heat is 29%, how we heat our domestic premises, really. So they're two of the things that we have to tackle.
And Deirdre, maybe like that retrofitting that we have to do here is more significant than the national average. Maybe talk to us about
Yes, so
where that has led you?
If we want to, I suppose, realise, say, 35% of energy reduction, what the consultants are telling us is that we would need to aim for 75% retrofitting of homes here on the peninsula, which is huge because the target from the Climate Action Plan is 25%. So what we've done, and what with the support of Conor, we've broken that down into manageable steps. Well, how much will we save if we, tackle, a portion of the houses that are pre-1970s, if we do that first and we bring them up to a certain standard. And it's set out in 5 different steps, so that maybe there is a pathway at least to achieving that 75%, but we're not looking at this daunting task immediately. We have steps to do that. We also know in that context that it's estimated there's going to be 15,000 jobs in this area, and it's a real opportunity for rural Ireland into the future, all this refurbishment and retrofits of homes.
But those skills don't exist today.
Those skills are difficult to come by because as more and more people are starting to undertake retrofits and prepare for the time, I suppose, when we can no longer have gas and oil boilers. We're probably looking at 15 years down the line. People are starting to prepare for that. So the people who are skilled in that are very much in demand at present. And so we need to start thinking, our tradespeople need to start thinking about skilling up. I was very happy to see that one of our local tradespeople has recently registered as an SEAI installer for air source heat pumps, batteries and solar PV. So very encouraged by that.
But part of what you've actually done is develop some training curricula and courses.
And so we understand that for people to achieve that 75% target, people going to need to know, to understand where to start. How do I go about that? What's the best fit for my particular scenario? So with Kerry Education and Training Board, we've established a community energy mentor program. So that kicked off 3 weeks ago, and we have 10 fantastic people in a room who are learning all about the energy needs specific to the peninsula, and learning all about SEAI processes and how do we get together as communities to do this in the most efficient and cost-effective manner. And we're receiving all of that training at the moment, and it's absolutely wonderful. And the intention is for 2020 that we bring that information to the community and I suppose help people to get activated in this area, because there's a wealth of information out there and it's all on the websites, but my goodness, it's daunting to open up the website and go, where do I start? What's relevant to me without having to read through the 500 or pages or so that are there. So yes, that training is underway and we're delighted with the support from Kerry ETB on that.
And you've also been planning bus routes.
Yes, so so on transport, it is a huge chunk of it at 54%. Local Link Kerry have been very supportive there. They have designed a new bus route, new bus service for the Dingle Peninsula. So 2 streams, one that focuses on local needs and one that focuses on tourist needs. So we do see, I suppose, the 52-seater bus air and coaches travelling around Slea Head, and more often than not, they're empty. So it's to design a new service that's more fit for purpose, that's more frequent, that uses smaller buses. And that was done in consultation with many, many local groups as well. And it's things like people are going to need this on Friday to come into town for the pension and to just capture all of that need. And they're very skilled at that. So that proposal is with the NTA for approval at the moment, and we'd be very eager to see that in place for the new tourist season next summer. And if it does, then I know we're working in the background with people like Gas Networks Ireland and some conversations with Electric Ireland too about maybe trialling new technology, so trialling electric buses on that route or trialling biogas buses on that route.
And I suppose one of the bigger themes too that you're developing in all of the work is your participation in the shorter supply chains. So as we actually look like on the peninsula, how do we, I know there's been a Chagas study, originally 4 arms between transport, renewables, tourism, tradition and culture. As you've worked together, the 30 of you, you have just found an overlapping.
Yes, I suppose down the energy stream, we've worked with Gas Networks Ireland as well. So we have a feasibility study underway. If we look at the renewable energy, we have a feasibility study underway to look at anaerobic digestion for the peninsula, because of course agriculture is such a huge portion or such a huge part of what we do here. And it's, can we generate energy from that? Is that the renewable solution for us? So as we took a look at that, then we started working with Tagisk on the Skin project and developed a renewable energy working group. So there's a group of, it's about 5 or 6 of us. And we are looking at how do we implement this? You know, how do we look at cooperative mechanisms? How do we enable community investment? If this is a viable solution for us, remember we're still at feasibility study stage. But that group was looking at short supply chains, and it really is looking at the wonderful produce, what we can produce here on the peninsula from a food perspective. And the tragedy is, I suppose, we see, the palace vans bringing in food here, and our animals are being maybe driven out in vans to be killed for factory prices. And that just doesn't make any sense to us. So this project is about, I suppose, developing the product and marketing it properly here. It's about food producers coming together in a cooperative way and working with the restaurant owners, working with our butcher here on the peninsula, and finding those supply chains. I think we have exemplars of how it works so well, and there's case studies done by Tagisk all over Europe of how you have very profitable, financially viable businesses out of all of this. Manor Organic is a great example. You know, they have the shop in Cork, in Tralee. I think actually Fishbox, you just have to see it's out the door. If you provide a quality product, we will all pay for it and we will appreciate it, and it's better for our health all around. So that's a working group, the food production group within that. But we see synergies then with the renewable energy, because the animals on the peninsula, one thing that's stopping our farmers from doing this is if they get their animals killed, they need to deal with the offal. And the offal there is a monopoly there that can charge a price for dealing with that, which makes it financially unviable. But the anaerobic digester can actually take the offal, so that removes that barrier there. So as we're going along, there's other examples of synergies between all the groups. Obviously, tourism is a big one. There's agri-tourism and all of that. So yeah, all working together, and I think that's the key.
Before I have you leave and our next guest join, could I ask both of you to say, maybe very briefly, but what is the work that you've both undertaken in the last few years? What has it meant to you personally?
Well,
Martha?
For me, for me, I suppose it was the realization of my lifestyle on these places that we love, and actually on my 3 children's future as well. I mean, that was, when you realize this impact, then you can't ignore it, you can't forget it. So I've changed my lifestyle quite a bit in reaction to that. I think also I'm willing to put myself out there, put myself in positions that I wouldn't normally have. I mean, if you told me 4 years ago that I'd be here as part of Ireland's Edge, I would have laughed in your face, you know. So I'm willing to put myself out there because I know what's at stake and I know how little time we've left. So when the next generation asks us what did we do, well, I can say I went on Ireland's Edge. Hopefully someone's listening.
Deirdre?
Well, I think bringing it back to a more local model for living and working in rural areas has a big part to play in climate action and in resolving the problem. From the simple obvious of if you're not commuting long distances, you're taking away from transport emissions. But there's loads of other examples in that. And it's a little bit about going back to how we used to live in the past, and communities being more dependent on each other than we are used to, than we have grown used to being. So it's taking that little step back, but not going backwards, because now we have global connectivity, and that's the big thing here. So with global connectivity, we can take the best things from how we used to live to be sustainable into the future, but we can still progress careers from an area as beautiful as here.
Thank you both very, very much.